320 Days of Post-Stroke Neurological Reorganization Part 2, number 1629, the 6th of May 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category, Stroke and Seizures. Emotional changes after stroke. Another major change occurring in the emotional domain baffled the stroke. Although I deeply cared about humanitarian work and helping people, I could maintain a certain emotional distance from suffering and sadness after the stroke. This emotional distance became noticeably smaller. Now, when I watch documentaries, news reports, YouTube videos, or hear stories involving suffering, illness, poverty, or human tragedy, I become emotionally touched much more easily than before. My charitable motivation itself did not fundamentally change because I have spent decades supporting educational charity programs and, more recently, trying to help patients through my medical research of personalized medicine. However, my emotional resonance with suffering became more direct and less filtered. From a systems viewpoint, it feels as if my emotional guard softened after the stroke. The analytical capability remains strong, perhaps even stronger than before. But the emotional buffering layer became thinner. I can no longer maintain the same emotional separation I once had from human suffering, from a neuroscience perspective. This may reflect changes involving emotional gating, inhibitory filtering, or changes in the balance between the emotional and logical parts of my brain after the stroke and seizures. Again, I cannot medically prove this interpretation, but it matches my subjective experience closely. Neuroplasticity and real-world rehabilitation. Another lesson I learned from this unique process is that memory itself is multidimensional and cannot be measured adequately using simple tests alone. Why refrigerator exercise measured only one narrow form of short-term recall? Real-world cognition involves much more complicated functions, including spatial navigation, autobiographical reconstruction, emotional association, contextual linkage, facial recognition, temporal indexing, the brain's ability to place memories in the correct time period, and environmental familiarity. This explains why I initially believed my recovery was nearly complete before discovering additional weaknesses after returning to Hawaii. In reality, the brain contains many partially independent but interconnected systems, and recovery may progress differently across those systems. At the same time, Hawaii itself unexpectedly became part of my rehabilitation process. Walking through familiar neighborhoods became a form of active neural retraining. Each street corner, store, bus stop, familiar face, and visual landmark acted as a contextual retrieval trigger, helping reconnect partially weakened neural pathways. This strongly convinced me that movement, environmental interaction, sensory stimulation, and active navigation play major roles in neurological recovery. Conclusion: today, approximately 320 days after my stroke, my current self-assessment is this: my short-term memory has substantially recovered, while approximately 10% to 15% weakness still remains in intermediate autobiographical retrieval, especially involving memories from 1 to 3 years before the stroke. At the same time, my deep conceptual reasoning, interdisciplinary integration, and systems-level understanding have become significantly stronger than before. Perhaps 2 to 3 times stronger. My emotional sensitivity and empathy have also increased substantially. Most importantly, this experience fundamentally changed how I view the human brain. The brain is not merely a storage device, it is a living dynamic network involving connectivity, routing, association, prioritization, adaptation, reinforcement, and continuous reorganization. In many ways, the brain behaves similarly to the complex nonlinear systems I studied throughout my engineering and AI career. However, the human brain is vastly more adaptive, emotional, and biologically plastic than any semiconductor system we have ever designed. Approaching the age of 80, particularly after being involved for many decades in science, math, physics, engineering, computers, and AI domains, I have found that the human brain is the most amazing and fascinating organ to study and learn from. Perhaps that is why my post-stroke journey unexpectedly led back toward topology, connectivity, neuroplasticity, and systems integration once again. Additional notes: first, I discovered that memories from about 1 to 3 years before my stroke were more fragile than memories from 30 to 40 years ago. Surprisingly, this appears to match a known neurological phenomenon called Ribot's law. In simple terms, very old memories are often stored more deeply and repeatedly inside the brain over many decades, making them more stable and harder to lose. More recent memories may not yet be stored as strongly, which can make them more vulnerable to stroke injury or seizures. Second, the softening of my emotional guard appears to be another important part of my recovery. Before the stroke, I could maintain more emotional distance from sadness and suffering. After the stroke and seizures, I became much more emotionally sensitive. Stories involving illness, poverty, tragedy, or human suffering now affect me much more deeply than before. From a brain perspective, this may mean that some of the normal emotional filters became weaker after the neurological injury. However, I do not necessarily see this as a negative change. In many ways, it has deepened my humanitarian motivation and transformed my medical research from a purely academic exercise into a more compassionate human mission, helping save other patients' lives through knowledge sharing. Third, my transition into using topology to describe biomedical systems may be one of the most unexpected and exciting developments from the journey. In simple terms, topology helps describe shape, connectivity, movement direction, and how different parts of a complex system remain connected together. It appears that the stroke and post-stroke seizures may have pushed my brain toward finding a more unified and multidimensional way to understand complex biomedical systems. Fourth, by combining topology with viscoplasticity, I believe I may have developed a new math-physical framework for studying disease progression. In plain language, topology helps me visualize the shape, movement, and connectivity of a biomedical system, while viscoplasticity helps me measure the stress, strain, energy accumulation, and time-dependent changes occurring inside the system. Together, these two methods allow me to study disease not only as isolated numbers, but as a dynamic multidimensional system that continuously changes over time. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.